Usually when we talk about human survival, we focus on action.
Right, like the fight or flight response.
Exactly. It's all about kinetic energy. I mean, you run away or you hide behind a barricade or you build a physical wall or you fight back with whatever you have in your hands.
Yeah, you do something physical to change your situation.
Right.
It fundamentally revolves around exertion.
Right.
The whole biological response is designed to make you louder and larger. Your heart rate spikes to pump oxygenated blood to your extremities. Your adrenaline surges to dull pain.
Yeah, your body basically prepares to make noise, create friction, and just make a tangible impact on your environment.
Exactly. But then you encounter a scenario where action itself is the primary threat.
Which is just wild. A situation where the only way to survive isn't to fight or even to hide in the traditional sense.
Right. You have to actively suppress the very automatic, involuntary functions that keep your biological machine running.
Right. Suddenly, the instinct to take a deep, desperate breath of air when you're terrified becomes the exact mechanism that will doom you. It's terrifying.
It really is. And that's what we are looking at today for this deep dive. It's a first-hand account, a 10-day travelogue titled The Listener, An Echo in the Dark.
It's quite a document.
It is. Our mission today is to deconstruct what is essentially a masterclass in psychological terror. It's documented by a traveler who, they stumbled into this highly reclusive village stalked by an entity known only as the Listener.
And what's fascinating here is how the source material completely subverts our fundamental expectations of what fear actually is.
Right.
It doesn't rely on the sudden loud jump scares or, the violent physical encounters we are so accustomed to.
Yeah, no monsters jumping out of closets here.
No, exactly. Instead, it weaponizes silence. And in doing so, it forces you, the listener, to think constantly about your own most involuntary rhythmic action.
Your breathing.
Right. It makes the human autonomic nervous system the central battleground of the entire narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the day-by-day breakdown in this journal, it becomes this profound study in adaptation and acoustic mimicry.
Yes. And the horrific, slow-motion transformation of an observer into an apex predator.
It's a chilling learning process.
It really is. So we're going to move through this traveler's journal chronologically to truly understand how this creature evolves.
It makes the most sense.
Right. So it all starts with the architecture of silence. On day 1, the traveler arrives at this isolated village just before sunset.
And the first thing they note is that the auditory landscape is completely unnervingly wrong.
Yeah, they describe it as simply, quote, too quiet.
We really need to explore the concept of acoustic ecology here. I mean, human settlements, by their very nature, generate a constant, complex hum.
Like background noise.
Exactly. Even the smallest, most technologically primitive village has a baseline frequency of life. You have the sound of footsteps on dirt, the clatter of tools.
Voices carrying on the wind, dogs barking, children playing.
Right. And the human brain is actually wired to filter this baseline hum out as safe background noise.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so when that hum is completely missing, it creates a vacuum. The brain instantly registers that vacuum as a threat environment, often before the conscious mind even realizes what's missing.
Wow. I think we've all experienced a micro version of that.
Oh, for sure.
Like when you're walking in the woods and suddenly all the birds and insects just stop chirping.
That sudden drop in ambient noise makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Exactly. So the traveler is experiencing that on a macro societal level. And as they walk past the houses, it gets more unsettling.
Because of the doors.
Right. Every door slowly closes as they approach. But the crucial detail the traveler notes is that none of the doors are slammed. They just quietly shut.
And that detail about the doors is a brilliant indicator of the underlying sociology. A slammed door is an emotional reactionary event.
Like someone panicking.
Right. It communicates sudden panic or anger, and crucially, it generates a sharp percussive sound wave.
It's loud.
Exactly. The fact that the doors simply shut, deliberately and quietly, indicates a society where every single physical micro-action has been carefully calculated to eliminate sound.
That's intense.
It is. The villagers have systematically unlearned the very human instinct to slam a door in fear. This isn't sudden panic. This is a highly evolved, deeply ingrained, communal trauma response.
It paints an incredible picture. It's like an organism shutting down its non-essential functions to hide from a predator.
That's a great way to put it.
The whole village essentially plays dead every single night. So the traveler is walking through this paralyzed environment, and an old man stops them near the village well.
And he gives a very simple warning.
Right. He says, leave before night. The traveler, totally oblivious, just smiles and says they plan to stay.
And the old man doesn't argue. He doesn't yell.
He just whispers, and don't breathe loudly.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Let's adopt the perspective of those local villagers observing this interaction.
Okay.
Put yourself in the shoes of someone who has spent their entire life mastering this terrifying discipline of absolute silence.
Right. They're experts at it.
Exactly. To the locals, this naive traveler arriving with their heavy footsteps, their smiling greetings, and their casual disregard for the setting sun. They aren't just a stranger.
What are they?
To them, the traveler is a ticking time bomb, casually strolling through their streets. Every leaf the traveler crunches underfoot must send shockwaves of absolute terror through the residents.
Oh, I bet. But I have to push back on the old man's tactic here.
Okay, how so?
If I am the old man and a literal ticking time bomb walks into my village, why wouldn't I just explain the danger explicitly?
You mean give them all the details?
Yeah, why just whisper, don't breathe loudly? Why not grab the traveler, pull them inside, and say, listen to me. There is a literal monster outside that hunts by sound. Do not make a peep.
It seems counterintuitive to our modern sensibilities of clear communication, sure. But you have to view it through the lens of generational terror and acoustic vulnerability.
Generational terror, right?
In communities governed by an intense, omnipresent fear, speaking of the terror extensively often functions as a psychological taboo.
Like saying Voldemort's name.
Kind of, yeah. To give it a detailed description is to give it power in the daylight. Furthermore, any lengthy explanation invites conversation.
Oh, that makes sense.
If he explains the whole story, the traveler might ask questions, might scoff loudly, or might panic and cause a commotion.
So, by isolating the instruction purely to the breath, he is targeting the only vulnerability that really matters.
Yes, and consider the biology. You can choose not to speak. You can choose to sit perfectly still and not walk.
But you cannot choose not to breathe.
Exactly. Breath is the inescapable rhythm of life. He is giving the traveler the only piece of actionable advice that might actually keep them alive.
But taking that a step further, wouldn't holding your breath actually make your heart beat harder and louder?
That's a very common assumption.
Because if I'm terrified and I stop breathing, my heart feels like it's going to pound right out of my chest. Isn't the old man's advice physically counterproductive if the creature has super hearing?
That is an excellent physiological point. However, the physics of sound transmission provide the answer here.
Okay, lay it on me.
A heartbeat is a low-frequency internal thud. It is naturally muffled by muscle, bone, and tissue.
So it doesn't travel well.
Right. Unless a predator has its ear pressed directly to your sternum, that sound doesn't travel far through the air at all.
Okay.
A panicked breath, on the other hand, involves a friction of air moving rapidly over the vocal cords, through the trachea, and out the nasal cavity or mouth.
It's higher pitched.
Exactly. It creates a higher frequency wheeze or gasp that carries significantly further across an open acoustic space. The old man knows that the wheeze of a lung is a far greater beacon than the thud of a heart.
That makes a chilling kind of sense. And the traveler very quickly learns exactly why this village goes into such extreme lockdown.
Right. Which brings us to the physical manifestations of this terror on day 3 and day 4.
Yeah. The traveler notes that the evening routine is absolute. At exactly sunset, the entire village just vanishes behind locked doors, covered windows, and silence.
A total acoustic lockdown.
Exactly. Then comes the midnight awakening on day 3.
This is where the abstract threat becomes a tangible, localized reality.
The traveler wakes up suddenly, not because of a nightmare and not because of a loud noise. They are just instantly awake.
Which is terrifying in itself.
And the journal describes the air feeling overwhelmingly heavy, like a physical pressure pressing down on their chest.
Right.
They try to take a deep breath to calm their racing heart, but a primal instinct physically stops them from inhaling. They freeze.
And then they hear it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In the absolute quiet, they hear slow, dragging steps outside the house, stopping at each door and just listening.
We really need to dive deep into the biological mechanics of that physical sensation.
Heavy air.
Yeah. The traveler describing the heavy air and the pressure on the chest is not just poetic storytelling.
What is it then?
That is the human body's primal alarm system functioning exactly as it evolved to do millions of years ago.
Wow.
The autonomic nervous system is recognizing an apex predator in the immediate vicinity before the conscious mind has even processed any auditory or visual data.
Wait, how does it do that without seeing or hearing at first?
Through the perception of infrasound.
Infrasound, like what elephants use.
Exactly like that. Infrasound consists of sound waves that are below the frequency of human hearing, typically below 20 hertz.
So we can't hear it, but we feel it, like the bass at a concert.
Right. We cannot hear them as a tone, but our bodies absolutely feel them. Apex predators in the real world, like tigers, use infrasound.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. A tiger's roar contains deep, low-frequency waves that can literally vibrate the fluid in the eyes and the chest cavities of their prey.
Oh, that is wild.
It causes a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread, nausea, and physical paralysis.
So the traveler's body is basically sensing the localized threat through these subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure.
Exactly. And it triggers an immediate physiological suppression of the respiratory system to prevent detection.
It is your lizard brain violently seizing the wheel from your conscious mind and screaming, "Do not move a single muscle or we die."
Precisely that. And the auditory description of the entity tracking along the houses is equally important. Those slow, dragging steps.
Right, so the traveler investigates those steps on the morning of day 4. They go outside and find footprints in the dirt.
And they aren't normal.
No, the journal makes it clear these are not normal human footprints. They are described as being too long, too narrow, like something stretched out.
Very unsettling.
And the most terrifying detail, the footprints don't lead into any of the houses. They just go from door to door and stop right at the threshold.
The morphology suggested by those footprints is deeply unsettling if we think about the biomechanics.
How so?
Well, a footprint that is stretched, long, and narrow implies an anatomy that is entirely unnatural for a bipedal creature.
Right, like it's not built to walk on 2 legs.
Exactly. The dragging sound from the night before perfectly aligns with a foot structure that is simply too long to be lifted and placed efficiently.
Because a human walks by striking the heel and rolling to the toe.
Right. This creature is imitating bipedal locomotion, but its physical form isn't quite suited for it. It has to drag its limbs.
It is wearing the shape of a person, but it hasn't quite figured out the mechanics of the joints yet.
That's a great, albeit disturbing, way to phrase it.
But let's focus on the fact that the footprints never go inside. I mean, if I'm reading a classic monster story, the monster breaks down the door.
The werewolf smashes through the window.
Exactly. Why does this thing respect the physical boundary of a wooden door?
Because it operates on a completely different vector of attack, which, frankly, completely breaks the traditional rules of a home invasion narrative.
How does it break them?
In a standard survival scenario, the terror comes from the anticipation of the physical barrier breaking. The goal of the predator is to breach the perimeter with force.
Like a zombie horde pushing on a fence.
Right. But this entity has zero interest in breaching the physical barrier, at least not initially. The terror isn't that the monster will break down the door.
Then what is it?
The terror is its infinite patience outside the boundary.
Oh, wow. It is hunting on an acoustic plane, not a physical one.
Exactly.
It's like a submarine using active sonar in the deep ocean. It's
Yeah.
walking from door to door, stopping, and just sending out its presence, waiting for an acoustic bounce back.
Yes, waiting for a breath.
The shifting of weight on a floorboard,
Yeah.
the rustle of a blanket.
It is a phenomenal analogy, but I would argue it is even more insidious than active sonar.
Wait, really? How could it be worse?
Active sonar sends out a ping and waits for the echo. This entity is acting as a completely passive receiver. It doesn't need to make a sound to find you.
It just listens.
Right. It knows that eventually the biology of the prey will betray them. Passive observation is incredibly efficient if the prey is biologically required to make noise to stay alive.
But passive observation is only dangerous if you actually give the observer data. I mean, if you stay perfectly silent, the sonar ping bounces off nothing.
The receiver picks up static.
Exactly. The problem is, as we established, you can only hold your breath for so long, and on day 5, the traveler gives this entity exactly what it has been waiting for.
Yes, this takes us into the fatal mistake and the revelation of the rules of engagement,
The turning point.
the moment that data is provided.
So it's the middle of the night on day 5. The tension is unbearable, the silence is absolute, and the traveler makes a mistake.
A very human mistake.
They cough. Just once. They describe it as a small sound, an involuntary tick in the throat.
But in that environment,
Right. In the crushing, anechoic silence of that village, it feels deafening, and the reaction is instantaneous.
it hears it.
The dragging footsteps outside stop completely, right in front of the traveler's door.
The speed of that reaction really highlights the hypersensitivity of the entity, but it also highlights the physics of sound in a silent space.
What do you mean?
Well, in a noisy city, a cough is masked by 1,000 other frequencies.
Cars, sirens, people.
Right, but in an environment that has been acoustically sterilized by its inhabitants, a single cough creates massive acoustic contrast.
Oh, I see.
It is a flare going off in a pitch-black room.
That's a perfect analogy. And here is where the encounter becomes intimately terrifying. After the footsteps stop, there is no violent thumping against the door.
No roar.
Nothing. The traveler holds their breath as seconds turn into minutes, and then a slow, agonizing scrape against the wood.
The traveler realizes it's the sound of something leaning its weight against the outside of the door.
Just listening. And it is leaning exactly at the height where the traveler's face is hovering on the other side.
A few inches of old wood separating predator and prey, aligned perfectly face to face in the dark.
The horrific intimacy of that alignment is staggering. It demonstrates that the entity doesn't just know which house the sound came from.
Right. It possesses the spatial awareness to pinpoint the exact vertical and horizontal origin of the acoustic wave through a solid barrier.
It knows exactly where the traveler's mouth is.
It's just incredible precision.
The traveler writes that they didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't exist for what felt like hours. Eventually, the heavy steps drag away.
But the damage is completely done.
The next day, day 6, the local people finally share the lore. They see the terrified look in the traveler's eyes, and they know what happened.
They know it found them.
They explain that the entity is called the Listener. They confirm that it never enters houses, it never breaks doors, and it doesn't chase.
It just listens.
And the absolute kicker, they tell the traveler, if it hears you clearly, it remembers.
That specific piece of lore, that it remembers, completely redefines the nature of the threat we are analyzing.
It's not just an animal.
Exactly. It confirms that this entity is not a mindless beast acting on a hunger drive.
Oh.
A wolf hunts, eats, and moves on.
Right.
This entity is fundamentally a data gatherer. That cough wasn't just a sound that alerted a predator to the presence of meat.
What was it?
It was a unique acoustic signature that's now been logged into a permanent database.
Wow. It completely shifts how you view the monster. It's no longer an animal, it's a malicious algorithm.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Think about how modern technology works. It is sitting on the other side of a digital firewall. It doesn't try to hack its way into your system with brute force.
Smashing down the digital doors with 1 million password attempts.
Exactly. It just sits there completely invisible and waits for you to slip up and type in your password on an unsecured connection.
And once you do, it remembers your keystrokes.
It has your unique identifier.
Yes, and once an algorithm has your unique identifier, it can begin to build a comprehensive profile. It starts tracking your habits, your patterns, your specific inputs.
I want to go back to the local perspective again because the psychology of the village during day 5 is haunting.
It's so dark.
Imagine being the neighbor in the house right next door to the traveler. You are lying in the dark, barely breathing, utilizing decades of survival training just to make it to sunrise.
And suddenly, in the dead silence, you hear the traveler cough.
And then you hear those heavy, dragging steps pivot instantly and head straight for the traveler's door.
The psychological toll on those neighbors is a fascinating and devastating area to explore.
Survivor's guilt, right?
Yes, profound, paralyzing survivor's guilt mixed with self-preservation. In psychology, we talk about the bystander effect, where people fail to intervene in an emergency when others are present.
But this is different.
This is a weaponized bystander effect. They know instantly that a fatal mistake has been made. They know exactly what that scraping sound on the wood means.
And yet they are completely, utterly unable to intervene.
Right. To yell out, to bang on the wall, or to throw a rock out the window to distract it would simply mark themselves as the next acoustic target.
They're forced into absolute complicity through their own silence. They have to lie there and actively listen to someone else seal their own fate.
Knowing that their own continued survival depends on doing absolutely nothing.
It is a community bound together by the shared trauma of helpless observation. And the traveler learns very quickly that once the listener has a sample of your sound, its tactics evolve dramatically.
Once it had that acoustic baseline logged.
Exactly. It shifts from passive listening to active psychological warfare, which brings us to the harrowing events of day 7 and day 8.
This is where the biological and psychological implications of the entity transition from unsettling to profoundly disturbing.
The methodology changes entirely.
Right.
On day 7, the traveler decides they cannot sleep. They stay awake, sitting in the dark, watching the door. Midnight comes, and so do the steps.
But they aren't dragging from house to house this time.
No, they come straight to the traveler's door. But it is not just silent presence anymore. There is a sound coming from outside, a whisper.
The traveler describes it as a soft, dry rasp.
And it is just repeating one word over and over. Breathe. Breathe.
It is no longer waiting for an accidental sound. The passive receiver has become an active interrogator.
It is attempting to elicit a response. And it works on a visceral, physical level. The traveler writes that their chest instantly tightens. They feel a massive, overwhelming physical compulsion to inhale deeply and loudly.
As if something external is forcefully expanding their lungs.
Yeah, the dry whisper just continues, scraping against the door. Breathe louder.
We really need to dissect the mechanics of this psychological torture because it is brilliant in its cruelty.
Cruel is the right word.
The whisper itself is insidious, creating a hypnotic, almost physiological compulsion. But the true genius of this tactic is that it targets an automatic biological function by dragging it forcibly into conscious awareness.
Okay, I have to ask about the nature of this compulsion.
Go ahead.
Is this a supernatural power? Is the monster casting some sort of dark magic spell that physically forces the diaphragm to contract?
A lot of people might assume that.
Or is it simply the unbearable psychological pressure of trying not to do the one thing your body desperately needs to do to survive?
I would argue strongly for the latter, which makes it infinitely more terrifying because it relies entirely on human biology.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think about the physical mechanism of breathing. It is controlled by the medulla oblongata in the brainstem, which operates automatically.
So we don't have to think about it.
Exactly. But the cerebral cortex, your conscious mind, can override it. If I tell you right now, do not think about your breathing, what happens immediately?
Instantly, I am hyper aware of every single breath I take. I feel the air in my nose. I have to manually control the expansion of my chest. It feels incredibly unnatural.
Exactly. The transition from automatic to manual control is jarring. By whispering breathe, the entity forces the traveler to manually regulate an involuntary system while under extreme, life-threatening stress.
Oh, that is evil.
The hyperfixation on the act of breathing makes it nearly impossible to breathe naturally or quietly. The body is starved for oxygen due to the massive adrenaline dump of panic.
Right, the heart rate is skyrocketing, demanding more oxygenated blood.
And the conscious mind is trying to suppress the lungs from expanding. The physical compulsion the traveler feels isn't a magical spell.
It is the agonizing biological conflict between the medulla oblongata demanding oxygen to prevent cellular death and the cerebral cortex demanding silence to prevent physical death.
The body is literally tearing itself apart from the inside.
It is weaponized psychology, and the horror of it doesn't vanish when the sun comes up. On day 8, the traveler notes that they survived the night, but barely.
They didn't sleep at all.
And that dry whisper of breathe stays lodged in their head all through the daylight hours. It is an earworm of absolute terror.
But during this day, the traveler makes a fascinating observation about the villagers in the daylight.
Yeah. They notice that the locals breathe strangely all the time, not just at night. Their daylight breathing is incredibly shallow. Careful?
The traveler realizes these people have trained themselves over years and generations to minimize their respiratory footprint.
This is a phenomenal detail in the journal that spotlights the true long-term survival routine of the village.
They haven't merely changed their nighttime habits.
They have fundamentally, physically altered their biology to adapt to their environment. So what does this actually mean for them on a day-to-day basis?
Well, what does that do to a human body over a lifetime?
Yeah, exactly.
It means the entire village exists in a state of chronic, low-grade hypoxia.
Hypoxia.
Hypoxia is a condition where the tissues of the body are not oxygenated adequately. Years of intentional, shallow breathing to avoid expanding the chest cavity or making noise through the nasal passages would have profound, visible physical effects.
Like what?
They likely suffer from chronic lethargy because their cellular metabolism is suppressed. Their movements are undoubtedly slow and highly deliberate to minimize oxygen consumption and accidental noise.
Wow.
You might even see physical adaptations like clubbed fingers, which is a symptom of long-term oxygen deprivation, or barrel-chested physiology, as the body desperately tries to maximize what little air it is allowed to take in.
That is horrific to picture. They're evolving into sloths just to survive?
The listener has forced an entire human community to devolve.
to actively suppress their own life force, their own vitality, just to coexist in the exact same physical space as it. They are starving their own bodies of air so that the monster starves of data.
That is the perfect distillation of their existence. The village survives through absolute acoustic starvation.
But the traveler has done the exact opposite.
Yes.
Through their involuntary coughing, their panic, manual holding of breath, their terrified shifting of weight behind the door, the traveler has provided the entity with an absolute feast of acoustic data.
And that wealth of data feeds the terrifying escalation we witness on day 9.
Which brings us to the escalation and the realization. Day 9 is the point where the established rules of the past week completely irreversibly shatter.
The timeline of the terror accelerates beyond the established baseline.
The schedule breaks. I mean, for 8 solid days, the footsteps have arrived around midnight. It was a terrifying but predictable rhythm.
But on day 9, they start early.
Right after sunset. And the auditory profile of the footsteps has completely changed. They are faster, they are incredibly direct.
There is no more of that slow, agonizing, dragging sound moving from house to house.
Exactly. The entity comes straight to the traveler's house, no stopping to check the neighbors, no hesitation.
And then, the traveler hears the most terrifying sound yet.
The door creaks, just slightly from the outside. Something is physically testing the handle, pushing its weight against the wooden frame.
For the very first time in 9 days, the physical boundary is tested.
The shift in pacing here is critical to analyze from a behavioral standpoint. The slow, dragging horror of the baseline observation phase is completely gone.
The directness of the approach signals a massive shift in the entity's intent and its capabilities.
It is no longer browsing the aisles. It has found what it wants and is moving to check out.
Yes, and the testing of the door, this requires us to ask a vital question about the creature's methodology. Why test the physical boundary now, after meticulously ignoring it for 8 days?
Because it's ready.
It tests the door because the data collection phase is officially over. The entity no longer needs to wait passively outside for an acoustic signature to leak out.
It possesses a complete, functional, auditory profile of its target.
Exactly.
Let's map this learning evolution out for the listener because the timeline is incredibly precise, and it mirrors machine learning perfectly.
Let's look at the epochs of this algorithm's training.
Okay, days 1 through 4. That is baseline monitoring. The entity is gathering broad data sets, walking the perimeter, dragging its feet, establishing the acoustic landscape of the village, and checking for anomalies.
Day 5, the anomaly is detected. Target acquired. The traveler coughs, logging their unique sound into the system. The training data has been introduced.
Day 7, the validation phase, the stress test. The entity returns, applies psychological pressure with the whisper, and forces the traveler to react.
It maps the traveler's forced, panicked, heavy breathing. He gets a full spectrum of their respiratory sounds, from a held breath to a terrified gasp.
And day 9, the algorithm is fully trained and ready for deployment.
And this leads directly to the traveler's horrifying realization written at the end of the entry for day 9.
What do they write?
The traveler writes, "It wasn't just listening anymore. It had learned my sound, my breathing, my presence."
The true psychological terror here is the sudden, crushing understanding of one's own complicity.
The traveler provided the exact blueprint for their own destruction.
Right. Every shallow breath held in terror, every panicked exhalation, every shuffle of weight against the door. None of it was just a reaction to fear.
It was a lesson being systematically taught to the monster waiting outside.
You think you are hiding in the dark, but you are actually holding a master class on how to be you.
You are meticulously training your own replacement.
Which builds the tension to an absolute breaking point for the final act of the journal. The data set is complete, the target is locked, the physical boundary of the wooden door has been tested.
And the sun sets on the traveler's 10th and final night.
This is the infiltration and the ultimate predator, the culmination of the entire 10-day methodology. Day 10, the climax.
What happened?
The traveler does not sleep. They do not move. They do not make a single sound. They are just sitting on the floor in the absolute dark, waiting for the inevitable approach.
Midnight arrives. The witching hour.
And nothing happens. Complete silence.
Yeah.
There are no fast footsteps rushing the house. There is no dry whisper slipping through the cracks. There is no scratching or creaking at the door.
The traveler writes that they actually believe, for a fleeting, desperate moment, that it's over.
That by staying perfectly silent for hours, they have somehow survived the night, and the creature has moved on.
The narrative brilliantly utilizes the established baseline of village silence against the traveler one final time.
That's so mean.
But withholding the expected auditory cues, the dragging feet, the whisper, it creates a vacuum of expectation. It lulls the prey into a false sense of security right at the apex of their terror.
Then they hear it, but the sound isn't coming from outside the door.
No.
It is coming from inside the house, directly behind the traveler, a breath. The traveler notes that it isn't their own breath they are hearing, but it is perfectly matched to it. It is perfectly timed to their own chest, expanding and contracting.
It is like an acoustic shadow, an echo, but impossibly close.
The mimicry is now flawless. The entity has achieved total acoustic synchronization with its target.
And then, the final devastating blow of the journal.
A voice speaks from the dark, right behind the traveler's head, but it is the traveler's own voice. The exact pitch, the exact cadence.
Whispering, perfectly clear, now I know how you breathe.
The traveler realizes they cannot even turn around, because the agonizing truth hits them, the thing outside the door for the last 9 days. It was never the danger.
It was never trying to physically break in. It was just learning.
The visceral horror of that twist is profoundly effective, playing on the most primal fears of home invasion and identity theft.
But we have to unpack the underlying mechanics of this mimicry, because it represents the thematic core of the entire source material.
Please do, because my mind is reeling at the actual physical mechanics of this climax. I have to push back on the ambiguity here.
Okay, what's your theory?
Well, if the thing outside was just learning, just observing, how did it actually get inside a locked house without breaking the door?
That's a great question.
Are we implying it can physically teleport once it learns your sound?
Yeah.
Because if it's just magic, it loses some of its terrifying edge. How does achieving perfect mimicry allow it to physically bypass a solid wooden door?
The journal doesn't explicitly draw a diagram, but if we apply the physics of sound and the established logic of the narrative, a terrifying mechanism emerges.
Okay, I'm listening.
Consider sympathetic acoustic resonance.
Like a singer shattering a wine glass with a specific note.
Precisely like that. Every physical object has a natural resonant frequency. If you match that frequency with a sound wave, the object absorbs the energy and vibrates.
Okay, so
The entity spent 9 days not just mapping the traveler's voice, but mapping the acoustic environment of the entire house. The creaking floorboards, the density of the wood.
oh, I see where this is going.
The slight test of the door on day 9 wasn't just checking the lock, it was sending a specific acoustic vibration into the wood to gauge its resonance.
So you're saying the mimicry isn't just camouflage, it is a key.
Yes, the creature doesn't need to physically smash the latch. By perfectly replicating the exact acoustic frequency required, it could theoretically vibrate the internal pins of an old wooden latch until it simply slips open, completely silently.
It essentially lockpicks the house using targeted sound waves.
Exactly.
That is horrifying. But consider an alternative theory, which might be even worse.
Oh.
What if it never actually came inside at all?
Explain.
We established that it uses infrasound to manipulate the autonomic nervous system. What if, once it perfectly masters your acoustic profile, it weaponizes that infrasound to hijack your auditory cortex?
An internally localized auditory hallucination triggered by an external predator. That is a brilliant and deeply disturbing extrapolation.
Right.
If the predator can perfectly replicate your internal monologue and project it into your own sensory processing center, the physical boundary of the door is entirely irrelevant. The sanctuary of the mind has been breached.
Wow.
Whether it physically walked through an acoustically unlatched door, or whether it manifested its presence directly into the traveler's brain via sound, the result is the exact same.
The barrier was breached not by force, but by the traveler's own stolen acoustic identity.
By using the traveler's voice to announce its victory, the creature confirms it is no longer an echo. It has become the source.
It takes the very sound of your life, the rhythm that keeps your blood flowing, and uses it to announce your end. So, summarizing this terrifying 10-day descent into an acoustic nightmare, we started with the quiet tension of a traumatized village.
We saw an entire human community holding its collective breath.
Devolving their own biology and living in a state of chronic hypoxia just to avoid the attention of predator that hunts through passive observation.
We followed a naive traveler who didn't understand the complex rules of this acoustic ecology.
Whose simple, involuntary cough in an absolutely silent room triggered a masterclass in psychological warfare.
We watched an entity act like a malicious algorithm, stress testing its target to gather a complete data set.
And it culminated in the intimate, inevitable, horror of realizing that the predator wasn't trying to physically break in it, was meticulously learning how to become you.
The echo, standing right behind you in the absolute dark.
It is a narrative that fundamentally weaponizes our own involuntary biology against us. It makes the act of living the very thing that invites destruction.
Exactly.
And speaking directly to you, the listener, who has been journeying through this deep dive with us, I guarantee that right now you are acutely, uncomfortably aware of your own breathing.
You are feeling the rise and fall of your chest.
You are hearing the slight rush of air through your nose. You are consciously controlling a system that is supposed to be automatic. And as you sit there, listening to the rhythm of your own life, you might catch yourself wondering who or what might be listening to that rhythm in the background, quietly learning it.
And that leads to a final, profound concept to mull over long after this discussion ends.
What's that?
If an apex predator perfectly learns your daily routines, the exact pitch and cadence of your voice, and the precise rhythm of your resting breath, to the point where it can replicate you flawlessly in the dark, at what biological or philosophical point does it stop being a mimic and start being a replacement?
Oh, wow.
If the village wakes up tomorrow morning and they hear the traveler walking around behind locked doors, breathing normally, speaking in their normal voice, who are they really listening to?
That is a deeply unsettling question to leave hanging in the heavy air. Thank you so much for joining us on this chilling deep dive. Until next time, stay safe and maybe keep it quiet.